Hello, my name is Michael Bayshore. I'm a quality control inspector and field service technician for Philadelphia Mixing Solutions. The training I'm going to be giving today is for Upper Blackstone Wastewater Treatment Plant through Daniel O'Connor and Sons on the 3855Q PTOS 57.7:1 ratio gearbox. Serial number is DEN 1332-2. Today's date is November 11th, 2011. For anyone who is going to be following along, I'm going to be using the Philadelphia Mixing Solution O&M manual supplied by Philadelphia Mixing Solutions Limited. To begin, some of the specifications that we're going to go with on the gearbox in the complete back of the O&M manual, last page, there's an outline drawing. This is, as I said, a 3855Q gearbox, 57.7:1 gear ratio, output speed at 30 RPM, service factor of 2.0 or 150 kilowatt hours. Motor size is 7.5 horsepower, 1800 RPM motor. Siemens motor is the brand name of the motor. 3-phase 60 hertz, 230 or 460 volt AC. This is installed as a sludge mixer. The installation has already been completed and was inspected by myself. So for purposes of this video, we're going to stick to the maintenance of the gearbox, beginning with the lubrication. And the lubrication section begins on section 7.1 in the O&M manual. Filling the mixer drive. Do not overfill or underfill the mixer drive. Fill line is described on the midpoint of oil level window with the drive at ambient temperature and not running. On the side of the gearbox, there's a small oil level window, circular in shape, with a hexagonal shape on the outside edge for tightening and loosening. There's a sticker located directly next to that window that indicates that the oil level should be filled to the center line of that window without the gearbox running. Once the gearbox is running, the oil level will drop off about 1/8 of an inch or so below the center line of that oil level window. I'm going to begin with the greasing portion. Well, actually, let's just stick with the oiling portion, then we'll go to the greasing portion in a second. The oil being used in this was indicated to be a Mobile Gear E2. Upon initial filling of the gearbox and operation, the gearbox will run for 100 hours. After the gearbox runs for 100 hours, or 2 weeks, whichever comes first, the initial oil will be changed out for new oil. While changing the oil, you want to inspect the oil, make sure there's no foreign particles, foreign matter. There probably will be small foreign particles in it, about the size of glitter, resembling glitter. That's just the gearing wearing in. It's no big deal. I'm talking about larger particles, very large particles that look like deterioration inside the gearbox or anything of that nature. After the initial oil change, maintenance schedule calls for a reoccurring oil change of every 6 months or 2,500 hours, whichever occurs first. Standard oil change procedures are as follows. Lock out and tag out power source before beginning. Drain oil from mixer drive. Take necessary precautions when handling oil if flushing is specified. Industrial and synthetic oil. Flush the mixer drive housing thoroughly after the original oil has been drained. Fill the housing to the required level with a light flushing oil that is compatible with the type of oil used. Check with your oil supplier or manufacturer on the type of flushing agent to be used. Clean drain plug to remove any particles before reinstalling. The drain plug has a magnet on the back, which any sort of foreign particles or anything that's in the oil will stick to that magnet on the back of the plug. Before putting the plug back in, wipe any sort of foreign particles off of that, and then you can reinstall the oil plug with pipe tape or a thread sealing agent. After the plug is reinstalled, clean and or replace breather or fill plug. Back to the greasing. Mobile XHP 222 EP2 grease, I believe, is the grease being used in this application. On pages 7.7 and 7.8 of the O&M manual, we have greasing diagrams, which I will also explain further detail later when we go out to the actual gearbox. It's easier to point it out then. There are 4 grease ports for filling on the back side of the mixer, 1 at the top of the Q steeple, 1 inside the Q steeple, 1 for the lower bearing, and 1 for the lower bearing cartridge. The upper bearing and the steeple and the bearing cartridge at the bottom have grease relief fittings. Grease should be put into these grease fittings until it comes out of the relief in the back. The lower bearing does not have a relief. However, the amount of grease that goes in the lower bearing is equal to the amount of grease that goes in the upper bearing to the point where it comes out of the relief fitting. So in other words, if you put 10 pumps of grease into the upper bearing before it comes out of the relief, similar, put the same amount of grease in the lower bearing, and that is usually how that situation is handled. Inside the steeple, there is low-speed coupling with a low-speed coupling guard on it. Inside is a grid holding the low-speed coupling together. This guard has an a grease plug on it. If there is a grease fitting on it, take the plug out of the opposite side and put grease into the coupling until it comes out the opposite side. If not, a grease nipple may need to be installed in the coupling guard and grease applied. All preliminary checks have been established by myself during the startup process. A preventative maintenance schedule is supplied in the manual on section 10.1, page 10.1. Daily maintenance. Inspect mixer drive for unusual sounds or oil leaks. Quick walk around, just put your hand on it, feel it, see if it's vibrating any different than the day before, if there's any unusual noises, any unusual vibrations. Call to attention to the troubleshooting section of this guide or contact a Philadelphia Mixer representative with any questions. Weekly inspection. Check oil level. Mixer must be off when checking oil level and adjusting oil level. Record level and add oil as necessary. Monthly. Check operation of guards, alarm systems, gauges, controls, and other safety devices in accordance with owner's plant safety operating procedures. 6 months or 2,500 hour intervals. Refer to motor section for greasing instructions. Inside the manual there is a motor section which gives instructions for greasing the motor and how often that occurs. Change oil in mixer drive. We had gone over earlier the procedures for that. Add grease to all bearings, couplings, and seals. Some companies do have a procedure where they grease more often than every 6 months, and that is fine as long as it's not over-greased. You'll see how much grease comes out of the port when you put grease in it. Sometimes people do it every 3 months. It's all at their discretion. I don't recommend every week, but every 3 months, once a month sometimes. It just depends on how hard you're running it and how much grease is being used. As I said, when you pump grease into the ports and it comes out of the relief, you'll be able to tell how fast the grease is going. Inspect impeller for evidence of erosion and corrosion. This is still the 6-month or 2,500 hour interval. If you have a period where shutdown and drain down occurs, look inside, make sure that the props and the impellers and the shafts have no corrosion or any exterior damage to them. Check hardware tightness, retorque to original specifications. Retorque anchor bolts, retorque rigid coupling bolts, retorque set screws, blade hardware, and any hardware that you are able to recheck the torquing on. There's a torque chart supplied inside here, and torque specifications were also supplied to customer by Philadelphia Mixing Solutions. Extended shutdown period. If there's a period where the mixer will be shut down for a period greater than a week, we have a long-term storage instruction in here where we recommend that the gearbox is rotated by hand once a week to keep grease in the bearings, or ran under power to keep oil splashed on the inside of the box to prevent rust and corrosion and condensation buildup. As far as maintenance goes, that concludes the maintenance and troubleshooting sections of the training. Okay, now we're on site with the actual mixer that has been installed. I'm going to try to keep talking loud so it can be heard. A lot of echo in here and noise. Right here we have our first grease port. Grease goes in here, and this is the relief valve right here. Once grease is filled in there, it'll come out of that little relief port on the top. Same thing with inside here. Inside this steeple, take this cover off, and that's where that coupling is with the grease nipple on it that you put grease through it and it comes out the other side. And similarly, there's a grease fitting down here on this upper bearing with a relief on the opposite side. So you have to take this cover off and this cover off to be able to see when the grease comes out of the relief fitting. Down here we have our lower bearing, and here we have the bearing cartridge. Grease here, grease here. The back of the gearbox, we have a rotational directional tag. Rotation of gearbox is clockwise rotation, as indicated by the arrow at the bottom of the tag. Gearbox information located here. Gearbox lubrication information here. And tag identification of the gearbox located here. Inside this guard is the high-speed coupling. If the gearbox is shut down for like long-term storage, as we had talked about previously, remove this guard, make sure that all lockout tagout procedures have been followed, and rotate this by hand once a week a couple times just to keep oil and grease moving inside the gearbox. Preferably rotate it under power if possible. If not possible, do it by hand. But as I said before, when doing it by hand, be sure all safety and lockout tagout procedures have been followed in accordance. Over on the side of the gearbox here, we have the oil sight glass window. Oil level to be filled to the center of that, as indicated by the labeling next to it. Oil should be filled to the center of that while the gearbox is unoperational. When the gearbox is operating, that oil level will drop about 1/8 of an inch inside that sight glass, which is normal. Down here we have the rigid coupling bolts. Be sure that these are checked for torque when is called for on the maintenance schedule. Also similarly check the anchor bolts, anchor stud nuts, and any other external fasteners to be sure that all torque is still correct. Two grease ports for the motor. As indicated earlier, there is a section in the manual that does indicate the greasing schedule for the motor. And that should just about conclude any sort of maintenance for the actual gearbox itself at this point.